Thank you, Stone Soup Group. We appreciate Stone Soup Group and what you do. We're allies and colleagues in this work that we do for people. So thanks for inviting me. Introduce myself, you said. Okay, I'm born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. Worked at Hope Community Resources. There's my title, Organizational and Spiritual Wellness, for 12 years. That's a real street in Anchorage, Wellness Street. It's over by Providence, Alaska Medical Center. So that's kind of a fun picture to say this is what I do. And supported decision-making has become part of my role at Hope. This is how it started for me. On October 27th, so that's 4 years ago, 2017, Ann Applegate did a presentation at Hope about supported decision-making. Ann is the most knowledgeable person about this subject I know in Alaska. She's a national level expert on supported decision-making. And she did work for the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education, but she's on to something else now. Most of what I know about this, I learned from Ann. So that day, she made this presentation to the people at Hope, and then our director, Dr. Roy Scheller, looked around the room and said, "Where's Rick?" That was me. And the reason he called on me was he wanted me to learn all about supported decision-making and help implement this new thing in our organization. So that's how it all began. And I love Roy Scheller and I'm a good troop, so I said yes. It says alternative to guardianship. In a way, that's true, but it's also different from guardianship. I want people to understand that supported decision-making is not guardianship light. It's not guardianship at all, but it is, I'm going to say, another tool in the toolbox for people in Alaska that need different levels of support. I think it's based on the very human, simple concept that all of us need other people in our lives for advice. So today I needed advice about something involving law enforcement. So I called a good friend who's an Alaska State Trooper, and he gave me great advice. He just simply had the expertise I don't have, and as a friend, he helped me. I think it's a very Alaskan concept. The bottom bullet says that, because even though we Alaskans are so fiercely independent, the fact is we are actually very dependent on each other, even for survival in Alaska sometimes. Okay, so the idea is you have people you trust for medical advice, for construction advice, for financial advice. Supported decision-making agreements simply make those relationships of trust committed and official. That's the very simple idea. And you'll understand more of that as I go along, I think. Some people do need a guardian. Thank you, Amrit, for your excellent presentation. We're not anti-guardianship or anti-guardians. Some people do need that much support. But we think that it's possible that over the years, many people have been granted guardianship that may not need that much support. Can I say it that way? And sometimes guardianship seems like too much control, honestly, for people that are rather independent and should have more self-control of their own lives. So that's why we like this new alternative. But we're not against guardians. We're not against guardianship. We love ASAGA and what they do, and they know all about supported decision-making over there as well. So what happened was that very next month, this is back to my story, we formed a little partnership as kind of a pilot project with our organization, the Governor's Council and Disability Law Center. And so we began to kind of learn about this by doing it. And we worked out an arrangement. First of all, this is the people we kind of targeted at first that we thought might especially benefit from supported decision-making. Young people approaching age 18. So if a person has a disability or intellectual disability and they're approaching age 18 in Alaska, they're very often told you have to get a guardianship now. And again, for some people, that's true, but maybe not. So we think this is a good area. And sure enough, we have helped people in that category obtain a supported decision-making agreement. The second people we profile was adults with guardians who don't need that much support. Yes, and I'll tell you this now, it's probably going to be in the PowerPoint later. The way the Alaska statute was written, a person who currently does have a guardian can enter into a supported decision-making agreement with the guardian's consent. The guardian signs off on the agreement. And in the process of time, it's possible, I could say it this way, that the SDM agreement will replace the guardianship. And by the way, that's actually started to happen to people in Alaska. A lot of adults who are guardians, parents, guardians of their adult children have this question right here. What happens to my adult child when I'm gone? Well, one possible answer is supported decision-making. If that adult ward, that's the word we use still, doesn't need as much support as a guardianship, maybe this one will do it. So this was another profile group for our pilot project. Older people approaching also age-related issues of dementia. That's right, that's a different one. So SDM, supported decision-making, can be a step that a person sort of tries, and if they need to go on to guardianship, that's still possible. I hope that was clear. Here it is, September 27, 2018. So now 3 years ago, Governor Walker signed HB 336, which was the Alaska Supported Decision-Making Act. This was at Special Olympics in Anchorage. It was the Aging and Disability Summit. And that was a good day. And by the way, Alaska is kind of an early adopter in the 50 states. There are more now, more states that have this kind of law, but we were one of the first. Hooray, Alaska. So that was a good day. And this is some of the components of that act. It has a template for decision maker and supporters. This is the language that we use now. The person in the center of the agreement is called the decision maker. So every time we're making the point, she's making decisions. And then the people around her in the agreement are called supporters. Yeah, the act, if you look at it, you can download it and print it. It's such a good template, you can almost use it yourself to just go ahead and create your own agreement. You don't need help from me or lawyers or anybody else. It's that simple. The act describes preferences. So the decision maker can say, this is the kind of support I want. And he can even say, I don't want support in these areas of my life. It can be broken down that specifically. It describes methods for communication. This is how I want my supporters to communicate with me. Very often, by the way, it's just simply making official what they already do. So if I already get advice from my doctor, I just want that to continue. And my doctor is going to sign in my agreement as an official supporter. The act also includes authorizations for release of information. And there it is again, I mentioned the signed consent of a guardian if they have one. It's a pretty good act. And by the way, other states have used Alaska's act as a template for theirs in their state. That's cool too. Now here's what has been my part and Hope's part of the process, going all the way back even to the original pilot project. We will interview the decision maker, just talk about it, tell us about your life, what kind of support do you want, and especially this question, who are people in your life already that you trust that will give you good advice? So we try to get to know the person. This is delightful, and we appreciate how open they are to share about their life and themselves and what they think they need today. And then we come up with a list of potential supporters. So we have more interviews. This person trusts you. She wants you to be a supporter in her agreement. This is how it works. And one very important question we always say to supporters, you understand this now. As a supporter, your role is to give her advice, but she makes the decision. And that means she can actually ignore your advice and do something else. Are you okay with that? And if the answer is yes, then that's a good supporter. Very often supporters say, sure, I want her to have as much independence as she can handle. Then we put all the information together and we call this document My Choices. Again, making the point that the decision maker is doing this. In fact, guess what? This process itself is an experiment in supported decision making, because the decision maker has to be the one that's leading this. Sometimes we have well-intended guardians and parents say, I want her to have a supported decision-making agreement. So we have to kindly say, well, that's not kind of how it works. It has to start with her. But that's how it works out usually anyway. So anyway, we do this document. It's 2 or 3 pages long. That's just kind of a narrative, telling their story. This is the story of the decision maker. This is the story of the supporters. This is the kind of support they're going to give. This is how they're going to communicate and so on. And then we, of course, double check all of that. So everybody involved proofreads it, make sure it's all accurate. And then what we do with that is hand it to the lawyers at Disability Law Center. So then they have all they need to go ahead and draft the agreement according to the Alaska statute. And then what happens is DLC gives that draft agreement to the supporter and the decision makers, and they sign it and get it notarized if they want to. They don't actually have to, but many people do. And then it's official. For 1 year, we operated under a grant, a generous grant, $50,000 from the WITH Foundation from 2019 to 2020. And we were able to employ a person here at Hope full-time as Alaska's only full-time supported decision-making specialist. Her name's Elisa Tornberg. She still works here at Hope in other ways. But then, of course, COVID came and it kind of really slowed down the process of doing this. We also did memoranda of understanding with other groups like Stone Soup, thank you, so we could work together on this project. And we wrote, or I should say, we facilitated 14 SDMAs during that grant year. But the grant ended and we're still doing it. Here's some FAQs, frequently asked questions. Who's qualified to have an agreement? Any Alaskan over age 18. Is it a legal document? Yes. Once it's signed and notarized, it is legal because it conforms to that act. It's a part of the law of the state of Alaska now. Can the SDMA be changed? Yes, very much so. So the supporter, the decision maker can actually ask supporters to leave the agreement. That's what the decision maker wants. And supporters can sort of resign from the agreement if their life changes in some ways. The decision maker can at one point say, I no longer want to receive advice in this area of my life. That's how flexible this document is. So it is changeable. And we can add supporters as we go along. By the way, there's no minimum number of supporters required. There can be an agreement with 1 supporter or 2 or 3. And another thing I should say now is the supporters don't have to meet as a group or a team. Sometimes that happens. The decision maker can ask for that. So getting advice from the whole group at once. But again, the decision maker might just access this person for employment advice. So it's one-on-one. Does the decision maker have to follow the supporter suggestions? The answer is no. Does the supporter make decisions for the decision maker? No. That's how it's very different from guardianship, of course. How many supporters can they have? I already answered that. Who can be a supporter? The answer is yes, a friend with disabilities could be a supporter. A care coordinator could be one. The only possible conflict of interest here is a direct service provider who gets paid, directly sort of by the decision maker. There's a conflict there. Ann Applegate always said there might be a creative way to write the agreement, which says any decision that might involve this supporter's, personal income, that supporter has to be recused from that decision. But probably it's safer not to include supporters who are paid staff. Why have this instead of a power of attorney? Well, the difference again is that the decision maker makes the decisions, where a power of attorney is another tool where that designated person can sign documents and make some decisions for the person. If a person already has a lot of autonomy and natural supports, why have an agreement? Good question. Because almost the ideal situation is just to put in the agreement what's already happening. Well, the reason to have the agreement is, one, the supporters are now officially committed to give advice. They signed on the dotted line, And the second reason is we think that the agreement might give the supporters a kind of standing where they can be included in information. For example, a decision maker is looking to rent an apartment. They could bring along a supporter for advice. So the landlord might say, well, why are you here? Well, I'm here because I'm a supporter in her agreement. So I'm here to give her advice. You see? So there are some reasons to go ahead and make it written and official. Can SDMA replace guardianship? The answer is yes, it can. And it already has happened in some cases in Alaska. Because what can happen is they can have both for a while, guardianship and the SDMA, and then come back to the court after maybe 6 months and say, look, this SDMA is working really well. Will the court remove the guardianship order, and then this person can continue with the SDMA instead? By the way, we're still educating lawyers and courts about this because it is still new. And sometimes they go, what is this? And so we tell them a little bit, give them a little briefing about it, I'll tell you a story. I had the privilege to help a person get the first SDMA agreement in Alaska. I got to know him and his family and his supporters. It was almost a perfect situation. It was so great. We did the agreement. At that time, his parent was his guardian. And since then, the guardianship has been removed and the person's life is working better. And one time I asked him a question. Did this agreement change your life? And I thought the answer would be no, because I thought the agreement was just simply describing what they already did. I said, did this agreement change your life? And they said, it did. And they told me stories about how this decision maker in other areas of life was now showing more independence and more autonomy. It kind of gave the person like a boost of confidence. It was really nice to hear that. So anyway, the answer is yes. It's not the reason we're doing this, but I personally think if a person doesn't need a guardian and they can get out of the guardianship and do this instead, that's a good day for that person's life. That's what I think. I hope that came out respectfully. What we're learning so far, it's still a new thing, so people are still learning about it. Here's something kind of sad that we have learned. When I ask a person, who are your supporters? Who do you trust? Sometimes they say to me, the only people I know and trust are my paid staff. I always feel kind of sad about that. We want to hear about family and friends, natural supports, community members, And honestly, one time we couldn't even write an agreement because the person who wanted some support almost didn't know anybody they trusted in any area of life. Without supporters, there can be no supported decision-making agreement. So we're learning about that. It's a challenge to all of us organizations to do all we can to facilitate relationships in the community and natural supports, of course. And sometimes now isn't the right time. So sometimes people consider it and think about it and think, I'll wait, maybe I'll do it later, and that's just fine. They're helping people in Alaska. Yes, in some cases, guardianship has been removed by the court. Any questions you have? And there's my email address and there's my phone number. If you want to email me or call me, I'll always call you back. I'll always email you back, probably today.
So I was having a question and I was wondering if SDS, for instance, is involved, or if there is any other state agency that is involved in this process in terms of assisting with a supporter. I know that in a care team, we have the care coordinator.
Yeah.
And of course, if there was a guardian, then we have the guardian and then the service providers.
Yep.
Which all of these are different from the state that manages the services in terms of ensuring quality and payment, So suppose the decision maker is not having any supporter. Now, who do we fall back on? or who do we expect to suggest a supporter? Would this be the care coordinator, or would it be any member of the support team, even the service provider?
I am aware that other organizations are involved with supported decision-making in many different ways. I'm telling you how we've stayed involved and how we're doing it now. And by the way, I'll interrupt myself. If you know somebody who would like our help, we'll still do it for free. We're helping people with this that don't even get services from Hope. It's just fine. We're happy to help. Okay. Sometimes people do have friends in their lives and they don't think of them this way. So we have to kind of trigger it. What about teachers you had in school? What about friends from your church? What about, or questions like this? If something broke in your house, who would you call? If you were thinking about buying something, who would you talk to about that? So sometimes we kind of remind them that they actually do have people they trust, just to think about in that way. Yes, a care coordinator can be a supporter. And a lot of people do have care coordinators, unless there's that conflict with direct, remuneration. We have to watch out for that. I'll tell you something else we did. We have a short list of people who have volunteered to become supporters to a brand new person to them. One of them is Dr. Roy Scheller, because he retired from Hope and he loves this concept. And so one time I know we said, we know a man that you don't know yet, but he could be a very trusted supporter for you. So very carefully, we connected those two people. And sure enough, Roy Scheller became a supporter in somebody's agreement. I think he still is. So that's just an idea, and he wouldn't mind me sharing that. So there are creative ways to do it. The one situation I shared was, honestly, we did all of those things and we couldn't find a supporter. So we kind of said to this person, go out and join a church or a bowling team or get a job somewhere or do something and build some relationships, and then we'll try it again. I will say it this way. Sometimes it takes some creativity.
I will say thank you for presenting today, Rick. I always enjoy listening to you speak. It's always a pleasure to work with you. So thank you for your participation. There's a lot about supported decision-making that's still new to a lot of us. So every time there's always something new that I gather too. So thank you so much.